Hello everybody, and welcome back to another Marvel Snap video. Today what I have for you is actually something a little different. This is the longest I've ever worked on a video, the most effort I've ever put into a video. This video comes from like a week of recording, a week of gathering information and stuff like that, where I snapped for 250 games of Marvel Snap on turn 1, and I basically just gathered data on that. So I was curious what would happen. There are a couple ground rules to this that I'm going to talk about in a second, but just really quickly, for anyone that's not really interested in the video doesn't want to watch everything, and I understand. I'm just going to give you the general stats. By snapping turn 1 every game out of the 5 decks I tested, Sarah Hawk was the best deck. Sarah Hawk netted me 45 cubes, which averages out to 0.9 cubes a game, which is very, very good. Like, that's a very good cube rate. Patriot was the worst deck I tested by far. I lost 20 cubes with Patriot. I averaged losing 1.5 cubes per game, which is awful, god-awful. Would not snap turn 1 with Patriot after what I tested. In general, though, I gained 83 cubes after 250 games from snapping turn 1. That's an average of 0.39 cubes a game, and 11% of the times my opponents would retreat on turn 1. And so just now kind of generally talking about the ground rules for this. I tried to keep it as scientific as possible, and so what that means is I tried to have a lot of consistent variables going into this to get a really accurate assessment of what happens when you turn 1 snap. Because in theory, turn 1 snapping makes a lot of sense, because you either stay for 1 cube or you leave for 1 cube frequently with your opponent, where if you snap turn 1 and you have a 50% win rate, you are losing 2 cubes and minus 2 cubes. So if you have a 50% win rate, not snapping on turn 1 and snapping on turn 1, your cube rate is equal, right? If you assuming you just always stay and leave for 2 cubes and ignoring -4 and +4, right? But by snapping turn 1 every game, if you have a 50% win rate, you also get the turn 1 retreats, which is basically in poker getting the minimum buy, which is why I think this was a really interesting idea to test, and I'm happy I did. And again, that happens 11% of the time if somebody retreats on turn 1 from my 213 game sample size. So the ground rule for this, I think, to keep it really fair, to keep it really consistent, I didn't do any of the testing during feature locations. So if there was a feature location, none of this footage, none of the testing, none of the data recorded was during a feature location, because I just think that's really biased. If somebody was donating me cubes, I didn't include the game, obviously, because I don't want somebody just blatantly pumping me to skew the results. That's just kind of silly. And then also 3, I didn't, what's the word? I didn't include bots. Bots are theoretically equally distributed for me at this point because I'm infinite. So it's not there's bots inflating anything for me. I was just played a normal amount of players. If I played an obvious bot, sometimes a bot might fool you and you're oh wait, was this actually a bot? They might have slipped into the data. There is room for clerical error, but if I was just playing a bot, I would just not include the game. It didn't matter. I think that's basically all the ground rules. Oh, one other thing. So also, as far as turn 1 snapping goes, so I always snap turn 1, and then, I would play optimally from that standpoint, right? So after snapping turn 1, I would play as optimally as I could to gain cubes. So I would retreat purposely. I would play out games as I saw fit. If I snap turn 1 and my hand's bad and my opponent snaps me back, I can retreat. That is a ground rule. The cube ante, by the way, when that happens, already goes up to 2, right? So if I snap turn 1 and my opponent snaps, the cube ante is now at 2, going to 4. And then I can retreat because I snapped first. So, if my opponent snapped me back turn 1 and my hand was terrible, I would retreat. But that's just a net 2. That's a net -2. So that's basically the ground rules. I don't think there's anything else to cover. If I missed anything, let me know in the comments if you just want clarification on anything. I tested 5 decks for 50 games each to try to keep a varied sample size. All the decks have the same ground rules about, playing 50 games, snap on turn 1, parameters that were previously listed. And now I'm going to get into each individual deck that I played. I tried to pick 5 decks that are very different, so we can kind of get a good sample size going on here. The first deck that I played that I thought would kind of be quickest and easiest for me might come as a surprise for some people, but I thought Galactus was a really good test. I actually ran a poll on my YouTube that I'll pull up on the screen now, and maybe I worded it badly where it was confusing. Maybe I didn't fully explain the parameters for what was going on, but I was really surprised by what people said as far as what they were expecting to happen with Galactus. Their expectations from the poll really surprised me. I played 50 games of Galactus, and Galactus averaged -1 cube I got -1 cubes with Galactus out of the games I played. So I had I had a 10% turn 1 retreat rate against Galactus, which means that 5 of the 50 games that I played, somebody retreated turn 1 against me as Galactus. You'll find that to basically be the average. That's 10%. The average was 11%. So, 10% to 11% is basically the average turn retreat rate from what I found. Interestingly to note, because I did record this, because for some reason turn 1 snap seems to like piss people off. Galactus by far had the most emote spam. So when I played Galactus and I turned 1 snap, at the end of the game, win or lose, that had the most emote spam. Out of any decks, by a lot. So it had twice the amount of the previous. So 4 out of the 50 games I played, I got emote spammed, which actually isn't that bad when you think about it. The only other deck that got emote spammed was Thanos, which I find really interesting. But so that was basically what happened. Galactus netted me a 1 cube loss in 50 games, which is, I don't know, like a minus 0.1 cube rate or something like that. Galactus, I don't think it's very surprising, for me at least, why Galactus has a bad cube rate. I mean, Galactus is like kind of the definition of like retreating and snapping well. For like, I definitely won games with Galactus, and I think Galactus didn't perform the worst out of everything here, but it did perform pretty bad. The reason why I think Galactus is basically even on cubes, because, you know, -1 and 0 is basically so similar, is that Galactus can kind of win even when you don't draw Galactus sometimes. It's kind of just like an alternate win condition in a few ways. So like, for instance, like this Mind game, this is just a perfect example that came up on stream. I didn't plan this, by the way. This isn't that rehearsed. Death is just really good into Collapse Mind. Like, now I just have a 112, right? Dr. Octopus can really disrupt your opponent. Dr. Octopus can just be a win in a Galactus game. You know, you have Electro and Wave, so like sometimes you snap turn 1 and you get to Galactus and like your hand's insane. If you have turn 1 Galactus, like if you have Galactus in hand, turn 1 snap is very good. Turn 1 snapping every game, regardless of conditions. You know, I would just snap every game consistently turn 1. I didn't like just wait for a good hand. Galactus doesn't really have that impressive of a win rate because you really need to have you need to lose less cubes when you snap. Or sorry, you need to lose less cubes by retreating, and you need to win more cubes by snapping. So when you just like evenly snap first turn, it's kind of bad for Galactus, because Galactus really benefits from like retreating on 1 cubes and winning 2 cubes. That's really all Galactus is good for, if I'm being honest. So, you know, it's actually kind of impressive that it had basically an even cube rate, if I'm being honest, out of 50 games of just turn 1 snapping, because I actually expected Galactus to be a lot worse. Other notes, I think Galactus is really boring to play. I played Galactus for 50 games, and it was the most dreadful thing ever. I would not want to play Galactus for 50 games in a row again. You know, subjectivity is implied. You know, people enjoy Galactus, and that's great. I think it's awesome. People like playing Galactus. It is an interesting card. It's very interactable, despite what people say. But man, I could not do it. I could not play Galactus 50 games in a row again. Galactus is not that fun. It is very linear. But so that was the first deck I played. That was the stats on the first deck. And yeah, we're gonna move on to the next one. The next deck I played was Bounced. This is the deck list right here, just if you're confused. This one didn't show up on screen for some reason. Was Bounced. You know, I just feel like it's important to talk about, like, I really tried to do this as scientifically as possible. So it's important to talk about, like, external factors that might skew the Bounce results. I am very good at playing Bounce. I played Bounce for, like, actually hundreds of games outside of this. I've gotten a lot of cubes from Bounce. I play Bounce all the time. I think it's really fun. So, like, you know, I'm the same player playing these games, but obviously I'm better at, like, everyone's just better at some decks than others. So I do think Bounce is a little bit inflated. Bounce performed the second best out of any of the decks I played. Bounce gave me 42 cubes, which is like close to 0.9 cubes a game. Very close to that. It's like 0.84. And Bounce had 8 out of 50 turn 1 retreats, which is very close to average. It had 3 more than average, but this is basically the only thing that skewed it. It's still basically 10% turn 1 retreat rate. And Bounce was great. I mean, so Bounce did really well. That's actually better than I thought. I thought Bounce would be performing a little bit worse. But, you know, again, a big thing to keep in mind is, like, the closer you are to a 50% win rate, the better your deck is at gaining cubes and benefiting from turn 1 snaps, because you are kind of getting that medium ante. So basically what this means is just, like, I retreated and I left, basically when I thought the game was lost, you know, because I am playing optimally. But the fact that, like, Bounce just has closer to a 50% win rate, and it has some, like, it wins a lot of matchups, honestly. It just has really bad matchups. Means that Bounce netted me a lot of cubes. And obviously, again, I do play it better than probably some of the other decks, and maybe than some other people, because I just play it so much. And, you know, I know that's might sound conceited, and I really don't mean it as that, but I just think it's important to be objective about this. Where Bounce is just, like, you know, it might be a little skewed for me, basically. Bounce was great, though. Overall, again, really solid deck. I think Bounce, I would honestly continue to turn 1 snap, or like maybe like turn 2 snap. The biggest thing with Bounce is that you have like terrible matchups. And so what I mean by that is, like, Sandman is an insta-loss basically always, and Galactus is a pretty bad matchup. Like, you probably lose like 80% of games to Galactus, where like you're really you have an escalated win rate in a lot of matchups, like probably over 50%, but it's against Thanos and Galactus where your matchup is terrible, where you should probably just leave for 1 cube when you realize what the deck is, and you kind of don't get that luxury of leaving for 1 cube against Sandman and Galactus because you already snapped on turn 2. I say this really trying not to be mean, but I will say that I think Galactus and Sandman players have a really bad understanding of when they should snap, because I'm turn 1 snapping, and it's like very obvious they're gonna win if they like play wave into something, but they don't snap me back till after their Galactus or Sandman comes down. So like I would probably retreat anyways, but they like force me out of the games. So honestly, like I feel like if those players were like more efficient with snapping, I would probably lose more cubes and the results might be a little bit lower. But that basically does it for Bounce. Bounce was great. It's a really fun deck. Probably will continue to early snap with it, realizing how good it was, because just like when you take apart the individual game and you look at like the wider scope of things, it's actually really interesting how the data kind of shows. Next up, what we have is some Patriot. Patriot was the loser of snapping on turn 1, which I actually wasn't expecting. This is like kind of the surprise for me, but also like kind of makes sense. So earlier when I talked about Galactus, I talked about how Galactus kind of has alternate win conditions to win the game. By the way, just the stats really quick. Patriot in 13 games lost me 20 cubes, which is terrible. Most of those ended in like -2 retreats. Patriot ended up losing me 1.5 cubes a game, which is very bad. Would not recommend turn 1 snapping on Patriot. But kind of what I'm getting at about like why Galactus was kind of better than it at like the turn 1 snap when it's very reliant on drawing like this core card is like, at least when Galactus doesn't draw Galactus, it still has good cards. Like it has, you know, Dr. Octopus, it has Null, which can be useful, it has Shang-Chi, it has like all these answer cards, right? Death even in some like weird circumstances, you know, Wave, stuff like that. Like it has like good cards. Patriot, when you don't draw Patriot, you have Misty Knight, you have Shocker, you know what I mean? Like you have like objectively bad creatures, you know what I mean? You have Ultron, which is like a pretty bad card. Where, and like Wasp too, you know what I mean? Like you're just playing bad cards. Like I'm just playing Wasp, you know what I mean? Like if I don't draw Patriot, I just have like a 0/1 in my deck, you know what I mean? I have a rock, like a little, basically. And so like this is the list I tried. Maybe I just found the wrong Patriot deck. You know, I actually really want to try Patriot again when I get Valkyrie, because I think that'll be cool when Valkyrie downgrades. But like this current version was not it. It was not very good. Patriot was definitely the biggest loser, rated bottom of the barrel by a lot. It was not even close in the cards I tried. The decks I tried snapping with turn 1, but that's it. That's Patriot. And, you know, again, for those reasons, when you don't draw Patriot, the deck is just vanilla creatures, which is terrible. Like, the reason why getting leeched is so bad is because vanilla creatures are pretty bad. Yeah. Next up, we have a deck that I know is a lot of people's least favorite deck. It's Thanos. Thanos, it was very good. Thanos netted me 17 cubes in 50 games, which is pretty good. It also had 5 out of 50 turn retreats for 10%. Thanos had the second highest emote spam rate out of any of the other decks, because I was keeping track. Galactus was number 1 with twice as many. Thanos has half as many, being in second place for the most emote spam. People hate the big bads, I guess. People want to emote spam the big bads, whatever it is, what it is. Thanos, I think, did a lot better than it looks with 17 cubes. I'm actually going to show this on the screen right now. The like last 10 or 15 games I played, I was like deathly sick. Where I was like, I spent like a week making this video. Where I kind of was just like, you know what, send it. Like, I'm just going to play the games either way. Who cares? So I think Thanos actually represents a lot better, because I think Thanos actually is like closer to a 50% win rate. And also like your opponents retreat so often against Thanos, where I would probably say that like critically thinking Thanos deserved better than 17 out of 50 cubes. If you actually remove the outliers from this sample size, like the like from what you saw, the 8 cubes I continued to lose in the last like 10 games, Thanos is like closer to like a 30 or 40 cube rate over the 50 games. So, you know, you can take that with a grain of salt. Obviously, like, skill and, like, how you play the matchup is very important to the turn 1 snap. So I'm gonna keep it as is. I'm not gonna redo Thanos, first of all, because that takes forever. But also because, like, you know, clerical error is, like, a part of this kind of stuff. Like, I try to keep it scientific. I try to, you know, remove bias and external factors. And playing badly because of external factors is just a thing that happens. But Thanos is very strong. I actually also, while I'm talking about, like, things that I would expect to happen if I was to do this again, I think Thanos probably has the highest turn 1 retreat deck out of any of the other decks. I would turn 1 snap Thanos very frequently in the new season, honestly, if I was just like playing at my best. Because people can tell when you're playing against Thanos differently to all the other decks. So like all the other decks that I played have like a fixed 10% turn 1 retreat rate. Thanos also had a 10% retreat rate. So it did kind of meet the average, but you actually have the insight of like, oh, I'm playing a Thanos deck when you are facing against them. Because you can click, like, if somebody turn 1 snaps me, the first thing I do is I click on their profile and I see if they're a Thanos deck, because it's just free information. And, you know, there is like the fact that like I was just already in Infinite, so I'm probably playing people who are also already in Infinite, where they might just not have cared that much. Where if I was like climbing from start and I was playing Thanos, I bet I would have a lot more turn 1 retreats like at the start of the season. Because you turn 1 snap with Thanos, and people know you're playing Thanos, and they're like, oh, like Thanos is kind of a bad matchup. I don't have that good of, like, I have a medium hand, I'll just retreat. I bet Thanos would have a higher turn 1 retreat rate. But you know, that was it. That's what I think. Thanos ends up placing 3rd, middle of the pack, had a positive cube rate by a lot. You know, 17 cubes in 50 games is like, okay. I do think it could be a lot better. I think it was really just me feeling sick and playing poorly that skewed Thanos down, but you know, take that as it is. Do what you want from that. But yeah, so Thanos was our second to last deck, and now we're gonna move on to the final deck. The last deck we have is actually Sarah Hawk. This is the Sarah Darkhawk version of the deck. I didn't do like the classic Sarah control with Hitmonkey because I thought this deck was a little bit stronger. And this was the big winner. This deck had 45 cubes gained in 50 matches, which is 0.9 cubes a game, which is very good. It had 5 out of 50 turn 1 retreats, which is 10%, so very consistent throughout this like kind of experiment. It did not get emote spammed at all, for those curious. And Sarah Hawk was really good. And I think, you know, kind of talking about like the basis for why I decided to make this video, if you have a deck closer to 50% win rate and you're turn 1 snapping, you are going to gain cubes because like every 10% of games, as I found out, you know, 1 in 10 games, you get a free cube, right? So if Sarah has a 50% win rate and you just retreat well, your opponent retreats poorly, and I just get a free cube every now and then, every 10 games, that skews your cube rate, right? Like, so I played 50 games, so I'm plus 5 cubes. So I get plus 5 cubes from playing this method, and then Sarah's win rate is just the other 40 cubes. Makes sense, you know what I mean? And the reason why Sarah has a good win rate, I think, like just flat win rate, not cube rate, but flat win rate, is that it's a control deck. It just has answers and has good threats. You know what I mean? You have so many abilities to deal with stuff. You are pretty good into Sandman because you just play good creatures. Arrow, by the way, surprisingly, as I was playing these 50 games, I realized how good Arrow is in the face of Sandman, because you can get ahead of them with priority, with like Darkhawk being huge, Rockslide being a good threat, you know, Nova, Killmonger early to blow up their Ebony Maw Sunspot, and then you grow your stats. When you both have Arrow and you have priority on the last turn, Arrow's really good when you're going to both only play 1 card. Arrow's great. You know, this deck is also really good against Galactus. You have Polaris, you have Arrow, you have Sarah. You know, if they're playing the, like, Galactus Wolverine deck, even if they get Galactus off, you can just Sarah into where they're going to Galactus. And you have a Sarah, they have a Wolverine in play for 4 power, they have 6 power, you have 4, they have priority, where last turn of the game, you can go Darkhawk into Shang-Chi now, or something like that, or like Rockslide Shang-Chi, something like that. You know, you have a lot of options suddenly, which can be, you know, very powerful. And since you have all of these tools to deal with things, and just like also your own good threats, like Lizard, like, you know, Killmongering, Nova, blowing up all your stuff, Polaris is just a good card that removes armor. You just have good cards, good answers. You just have closer to a 50% win rate. When you do this like snap turn 1 and your opponent retreats, you really see the benefits from it. It had, you know, 45 cube gains. 0.9 cube a game is very good, like very, very good. And, you know, I just think it's interesting. I wasn't expecting this to actually be the top deck. I thought Thanos would be, because I thought that Thanos would just get so many free cubes, they would just meet the minimum bid, because more people would retreat seeing it's Thanos. But it's actually Sarah Hawk. And I think, you know, as I played out this experiment and as I talked about it, it makes sense, because Sarah Hawk is so good at just keeping that 50% win rate, answering threats, and if you, like, pilot it well, you actually gain a lot of cubes, which is cool. It's just really, you know, it's resilient to so many things, like even wave. Like, I got waved here. I just played 2 cards. I think they retreat in this game, and this is a 4 cube, because I can just Arrow, they play 1 card, and then I Hawk. So like, even if they have like She-Hulk, like 6-drop, I'm fine. You know what I mean? Like, I'm actually beating a Doctor Doom here with how I'm sequencing. which is good. You know, like it has a lot of answers to threats that other decks don't have. Like the bounce deck doesn't have an answer to Galactus and doesn't have an answer to Sandman, but Sarah can. If you like realize they're one of those things, you can like not set up for Sarah, you can set up for playing Hawk, Rock Slide, or something like that, and then you can just win from out tempoing them. You know. But yeah, that was the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Those were the 5 decks I picked. Just in summary: Galactus, Thanos, Sarah, Hawk, Bounce, and then Patriot, which was the stinker. And those are the stats. That's all the information. I hope you guys enjoyed. This is the most effort I've ever put into a video. This was like a week of recording, a week of playing the games and stuff like that. So I really hope you guys enjoyed. I wanted to make something long term. Also, like waiting for the feature locations to be over is awful sometimes because I basically like couldn't play for 2 days to keep the like controls I talked about here. So if you did enjoy, if you found this entertaining, if you found this useful for like a potential season, I'd really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. I post all kinds of gameplay videos all the time with decks and stuff like that. We post a lot of Marvel Snap on this channel. You know, check out my Twitch. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching.